companies, and government agencies throughout Central and South America, as well as the Caribbean. It can be argued, and is argued in many quarters, that the explosive economic growth in China during the past 2 decades has been the main driver of the economic cycles in the LAC region. China became the 3rd Asian member of the Inter-American Development Bank after Japan and South Korea in 2009. I mentioned South Korea. They've also become much more active in the region and joined the Inter-American Development Bank as a non-borrowing member in 2005. And of course, we're all familiar with the presence of Korean companies such as Samsung and LG throughout the region. Our panelists today will focus on the interactions between Asia and the LAC region. Each of our 3 panelists will give a short presentation, and then at the end of all 3 presentations, we'll open the floor for questions and discussions. Our first panelist is Dr. Richard Bernal, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs at the University of the West Indies. Dr. Bernal, a professional economist with over 40 years of experience, was educated at the University of West Indies, the University of Pennsylvania, and the New School for Social Research and the School for Advanced International Studies of Johns Hopkins University. He holds the degrees of Bachelor of Science, Master of Arts, and PhD in Economics, as well as a Master's in International Public Policy from SAIS. Prior to his appointment as Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies, Dr. Bernal was on the Board of Directors for the Inter-American Development Bank for 8 years, during which time the islands of the Caribbean received more than $3 billion in loans and grants to government and private sector. Prior to joining the IADB, Dr. Bernal was the Director General of the Caribbean Regional National Machinery, and for 8 years with responsibility for trade negotiations with CARICOM, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic. He was the principal negotiator for Forum of the Caribbean States, or CARIFORUM, in the negotiation of the CARIFORUM European Union Economic Partnership Agreement, and CARICOM's lead negotiator and spokesperson in the World Trade Organization and the Free Trade of the Americas negotiations. Dr. Bernal was Jamaica's ambassador to the United States of America and permanent representative to the Organization of American States from 1991 to 2001. When he left office after 10.5 years, he was the 4th most senior ambassador in Washington, D.C., and the Dean of the Caribbean Diplomatic Corps. Dr. Bernal has given testimonies to several committees in Congress and the U.S. International Trade Commission on issues of concern to the Caribbean. His return as Vice Chancellor at the University of the West Indies is a bit of a homecoming for him, as he taught international economics and development economics there for 7 years before embarking on his diplomatic career. He's published more than 100 articles in scholarly journals, books, and monographs, as well as opinion editorials in the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Dr. Richard Bernal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, all. Good morning, fellow panelists. Mr. Chairman, you have raised expectations that I cannot fulfill. I have to tell my staff to stop sending out my entire life history. I should say about something I can be read in 2 minutes. This is a very broad state-owned, some are private, some are hybrids of state and private, some are multinationals, some are small firms, and some are very small firms. So there's a range of firms, and that means there are a range of firms in China that have an interest, even in small developing countries like those in the Caribbean. Okay, I want to present in three broad sections. I want to try to, in the first section, outline the trends and the stock of direct foreign investment by China in the Caribbean. Secondly, what are the factors which has influenced this development? And thirdly, what are the prospects? The trends are as follows. China is becoming a source of direct foreign investment, and to date, 87% of that direct foreign investment is being undertaken by state enterprises. That is the figure for Latin America and the Caribbean, which means when you get a foreign direct investment that's not entirely private, you're getting a state involvement as well. Second thing we need to notice is that whether it's private, hybrid, or state enterprise, the state is always somewhere in the background, assisting or enabling those firms to go forward. So that is much different from when you get an entirely private firm from, say, Canada or Europe or the US. The drivers at the state level are very much also the priorities of the Chinese state. And the main areas which have received investment, not only globally but in Latin America and the Caribbean, are energy, agriculture in particular, food, and raw materials. This is what the Chinese economy needs to continue its high rate of growth, and therefore these are the priority sectors. In fact, maybe 75% of the investment is in energy. Now I should just add as an aside that when these figures are all estimates, because it's very difficult to get information and up-to-date information on Chinese capital flows. For example, there are no recent figures for development aid. We have no idea how much aid China has given the Caribbean. There are just no figures. The figures for direct foreign investment are difficult to interpret. One, the state doesn't provide a lot of information. There are various institutes and international institutions that try to track it when those investments are recorded somewhere. Then there's the problem that if you look at statistics on direct foreign investment, you'll find that the largest investment by China is in the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. It's obviously not investment. That money is passing through those financial systems en route to somewhere else, including back into China. So it's very difficult to have accurate figures. As to the stock of investment in the Caribbean, let me start off by saying that it's relatively small. The largest recipient has been Cuba, and the best estimates I have for 2013 suggest that the Caribbean as a whole so far has received 600 million of direct foreign investment, of which Cuba has received 490 million. One of the factors which affects the distribution of the stock of Chinese direct foreign investment is the diplomatic relations in the region. There has been a contest for diplomatic recognition between China and Taiwan in the region. That has been a principal determinant of why the Caribbean has received so much aid from both China and Taiwan. And the policy has been that China would not provide direct, not authorize direct foreign investment in countries that recognize Taiwan. However, that's beginning to change. Chinese goods are everywhere, and there are some instances where countries that do not recognize China have received some investment. One curious case was when a Chinese firm bought an Australian mining company that operates in the Dominican Republic. So, although this has been a traditional stance, business is beginning to overtake the politics. So, the rest of the Caribbean really has not received very much direct foreign investment. However, the stock, which I just quoted at just over 600 million for Cuba, DR, Haiti, and all of the Caribbean, has increased rapidly. In 2005, it was only 81 million. So there is a trend for it to increase, and I expect that it will go much faster to other countries than necessarily concentrate in Cuba. Now, there are some pending investments. Let me start up by telling you what investments have been in the Caribbean. As I said earlier, energy, raw materials, agriculture. In Guyana, bauxite mining, timber, agriculture, wood processing. In Jamaica, sugar has been the main investment, and the prospects are for tourism. In Suriname, there's an attempt to invest in palm oil production. In Trinidad, there have been some small energy investments. In the Bahamas, there has been an investment in tourism. Chinese firm bought a hotel which is being refurbished and will be leased back to Hilton to run. And there has been an investment in hotels in Antigua. Now, let me add that there are some pending investments, and that investment has been in bauxite, pending investment in Jamaica. That is the picture of the state of foreign direct investment by the Chinese in the Caribbean. Remembering that it's separate from the amount of money that has been put in through development aid in the form of loans to government. Okay, the second section, what are the factors which have been driving this? We'll do this in two sections. First, Chinese interest. China is becoming a global power. It therefore feels it needs to deploy its diplomatic and development aid across the globe. The Caribbean, like elsewhere, has resources, actual and untapped, especially in energy and food. Chinese firms are looking for opportunities globally. They're being encouraged by the state. On the other side, Caribbean receptivity. Why has the Caribbean been receptive? Well, first stage was to build up goodwill, where China provided a lot of development aid and even built some projects gratis for governments. That encouraged the relationship. It was driven by the competition with Taiwan, but it created a lot of goodwill. It provided a familiarity with dealing with Chinese companies and with the Chinese government. And you have to remember that the Caribbean has passed through a very difficult financial period. These countries have all traditionally benefited from foreign direct investment and are open to and welcome foreign direct investment, especially at these times when the economies are experiencing slow and erratic growth. I believe the future of the investment in the region is going to be very much in tourism. I believe that remember that China is going to be the second largest source of tourists in the world by 2020. The Caribbean hasn't really been discovered, nor has the Caribbean done enough to market to the Chinese market. I believe both from an investment point of view and from a tourism point of view, it won't be long before this opens up. There's already direct flights through to Havana, and I imagine shortly there'll be direct flights elsewhere And this is a coming opportunity which I think will happen. Now, let me turn to the prospects and what are the factors which are going to influence the prospects. First of all, diplomatic recognition, relationship with China, familiarity, all of those in one bundle are going to be important. The countries that deal with Taiwan are going to be secondary investment outlets for the Chinese. Those countries that have diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China will be on an authorized list of foreign direct investment outlets. Secondly, let's remember that China is aggressively promoting foreign direct investment. The remarkable and unprecedented economic growth in China is beginning to change because what had driven it in the past, exports, rapid growth in exports, is slowing down because other countries are slowing down and not buying as much. You see this clearly in Latin America where rates of growth were driven by commodity exports to China. China is buying less and therefore there's a slowdown between those countries and those that bought Chinese manufactured goods. China is therefore redacting its economic model, and an important part of that is to encourage foreign direct investment for many reasons. To use this to produce Chinese brands, global brands elsewhere in the world, to continue the momentum of high investment, and to change the model on which China has grown in the past. A third important thing that will affect prospects is the learning process. There's a learning process on both sides. When a government or a private firm in the Caribbean negotiates with a Chinese enterprise, it's a unique hybrid because the state is somewhere in that mix. If it's not a state-owned firm, it could be a hybrid, or even if it's a purely private firm, the state is somewhere in there helping with finance, etc. And it's a learning experience on the side of Caribbean governments who have traditionally dealt with foreign investors that are purely private. But it's also a learning experience on the Chinese side. They are new to the world, and we can see from the experience in the Caribbean that they're new to an environment which is more democratic. They're new to private enterprise. And when I talk about their experience, they've made a lot of mistakes. So it's a learning process on both sides. Another factor which will determine what the prospects are for more Chinese foreign direct investment is the foreign direct investment policies of the Caribbean governments. This is critical, not only to what sectors these governments want to open up, the extent to which they want to have foreign investment of any kind, the extent to which they want to have Chinese investment. I mention that because as much as these economies need foreign direct investment, they're very sensitive about it. They're even sensitive about intra-Caribbean investment. So they're sensitive generally. When you're that small, you might be sensitive about selling a half an acre of beach land, because a half an acre of beach land in a small country could be a very important asset. So they're sensitive. So the policies they pursue are going to determine how much Chinese investment and where it goes. While I'm on government policy, I want to make the point that the extent to which a country benefits from any foreign investment is not only what that investment is and who makes it, it is also the conditions which a government sets down in terms of regulations as to how these firms operate. All foreign investors want to maximize their profits, and they have to be given guidelines as to what are the rules, what are the regulations. In the case of China, China is no different. The country has to make sure that it gets the maximum benefit by setting down policies. One of the interesting developments with Chinese investment is what I call the transnational ethnic business networks. A lot of Chinese workers that take part in construction projects stay on after and they go into business, and they have a competitive advantage because they already have Mandarin. They usually have family connections in China, particularly Hong Kong, and they can supply. This has become a sensitive issue across the world, from Nigeria to Antigua, of the extent of Chinese workers and the extent to which they still are going to business. On the question of Chinese workers, it's become a sensitive issue because countries have always wanted to get the maximum employment out of any construction. There has been a compromise in the sense that I know certainly in Jamaica there is a mix. It's no longer all Chinese workers. But I will make the point that sometimes governments are anxious to have an investment. Let's take a purely theoretical case. Let's say Prime Minister has an election coming up and he wants to have a new general hospital in the main city. He might want that so bad that he's prepared to have an investor or a loan and prepared to accept Chinese workers because it's more important to have the hospital. So in the Caribbean, governments have to make sure they're not too anxious about loans and foreign investors and not to relax the normal policies. But, politics enters the picture. It's become a little bit of a friction because local traders have sometimes felt the Chinese have displaced them because they have connections back in China. Lastly, let me say that a critical factor is going to be the performance of what I call vanguard companies. The first couple of companies that come to the Caribbean, how they perform and the experience they have is going to be very important as to whether that encourages more Chinese firms and the Chinese government to put money into foreign direct investment. The record has been not very encouraging so far. The palm oil project in Suriname ran into problems. The sugar industry investment in Jamaica ran into problems. The timber and wood processing in Ghana ran into problems. That's the investment side. On the infrastructure building side, projects have generally gone well, except for one housing scheme in Trinidad. So the record is mixed, and that is going to influence whether other companies, if companies come, and because they need to learn the environment and learn how to operate, they lose money, this will discourage. If they succeed, and that report goes back that these are countries which are open to Chinese investment and willing to negotiate with Chinese companies, that will be a factor encouraging Chinese investment. With all these problems, Mr. Chairman, I remain convinced that between the global growth and spread of Chinese foreign direct investment and the need for foreign direct investment in the Caribbean, that we're going to see a growth in the future in this respect, and I believe the sectors that are going to benefit or be targeted will be tourism, raw materials, food, and energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernal. Our next panelist is Dr. June Teufel Dreyer. Dr. Dreyer is Professor of Political Science at the University of Miami here in Coral Gables, where she teaches courses on China, U.S. defense policy, and international relations. She has also lectured to and taught a course for National Security Agency analysts. Before joining the University of Miami, Dr. Dreyer was a Far East specialist at the Library of Congress, and she has also served as Asia Policy Advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations and as Commissioner of the United States-China Economic and Security Review Commission established by the U.S. Congress. Professor Dreyer received her BA from Wellesley College and her MA and PhD from Harvard, and has lived in China and Japan and paid numerous visits to Taiwan. She has served as a United States Information Agency lecturer, speaking in 14 Asia-Pacific states. Professor Dreyer has published widely on the Chinese military, Asian-Pacific security issues, China-Taiwan relations, Sino-Japanese relations, ethnic minorities in China, and China foreign policy. Dr. Dreyer's latest book, titled Middle Kingdom and the Empire of the Rising Sun, Sino-Japanese Relations in a Historical Perspective, was published by Oxford University Press in 2016. The 10th edition of her text titled China's Political System, Modernization and Tradition is in preparation for Routledge Press. Dr. Dreyer is co-editor of the fall 2016 special issue of Orbis, whose theme is Taiwan in the Tsai Era, Problems and Prospects, which is published by the Foreign Policy Research Institute. She observed the Taiwan election of 2016 as a guest of the country's foreign ministry, which also invited her to the inauguration of President Tsai Ing-wen. Dr. Dreyer is a longtime member of the American Association for Chinese Studies and currently serves as its vice president. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dreyer to our panel.
Thank you. It's a great honor for me to be here today and learn from you all. And I, as you can tell from the introduction, I am a China specialist and to a lesser extent a Japan specialist. I am not an expert on Latin America and the Caribbean. Clearly, if you live in Miami, you pick up a few things here and there. And it has been my privilege to do that. It's a very interesting topic. Now, as you gather from what Dr. Bernal has so eloquently said, you can look at China from a number of different ways. Is China's influence good? Is China's influence bad? Or is China's influence just another business kind of operation? And here it depends on what you read and who you talk to. There was a recent Brookings study. Well, let me just say that the mantra from the liberal side is that China is good. And the mantra from the conservative side is that China is a potential threat. And then you have positions that are kind of in the middle. Now, Brookings has put out 2 recent reports on Latin America and the Caribbean. Those of you who are familiar with Brookings, it's a very China-friendly kind of place. You will not find any criticism of China, except teensy bit on the human rights issues coming out of Brookings. And I see someone of you is probably familiar with those things. Okay, well, let me quote to you from a recent study called Renmin Diplomacy. Renminbi is the Chinese currency, often used as yuan, but renminbi must have sounded better in the title here. So this is money diplomacy, essentially. And this is the exact quote. Latin American political leaders have by and large responded enthusiastically to the combination of trade, investment, and loans that China offers, seeing China as a contribution to the region's development. China's great experience in building and financing large-scale infrastructure is a particular boon for the region, for a region that consistently underinvests in this aspect of the economic development. And if you are somebody who has watched China's infrastructure in China, China's infrastructure in China, what you think when you read this is, oh my God. You have buildings collapsing. You recently had a newly built bridge collapsing because a couple of heavy trucks went over it. And highways that are 3 days old will crack and buildings will fall over. So remember that when you hear about these wonderful infrastructure projects. It ain't all good. Okay. Now, we have a somewhat more cautious assessment from another Brookings study. This is called The Geopolitics of China's Rise in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it says, again, this is an exact quote, and I have the studies here with me if anyone wants to see them. Based on available data, notice this is very carefully worded. We may not know everything. Based on the available data, it seems reasonable to conclude. In other words, I'm leaving myself an out here if it doesn't work out the way I'm about to tell you. It is reasonable to conclude that current macro levels of Chinese trade and investment in the region have had important effects. Notice, important is a neutral word. It could be good or it could be bad. One of the fun things you learn, or you're supposed to learn in political science, is how to read between the lines. And when I was in Washington working for the Library of Congress, the term of art was weasel words. And our military gentlemen here, that's still in use. Yeah, okay. Very convenient. So there have been important results in enabling both good and bad policy decisions, another really interesting phrase, by Latin American Caribbean governments, but have not yet translated into inordinate leverage on the region's domestic politics. And this is not yet translated, meaning, but it could happen. All right. Now, that's the liberal view. The right-of-center entities tend to focus on Chinese, the bad side of Chinese involvement. They concentrate on arms sales to the area and the fact that China is training military officials in China in a special Spanish language program at its National Defense University. And also the fact that when the Soviet Union disintegrated, the Chinese moved into several intelligence facilities in Cuba that used to be, that were built and maintained by the Soviet Union. They've also given aid to left-wing forces in the area, which all of you probably know. There has been a lot of talk about a canal through Nicaragua, which could have strategic significance. And just a couple of weeks ago, in other words, earlier this month, a Chinese company, Guangdong Zhongrong Energy Company Limited, began talks on getting funds to upgrade an aging oil refinery in Curacao and to build a gas terminal as well. Anyone wants to check that out, that was in Reuters, November 2nd. And I understand from other sources that the reason the aging oil refinery has not been upgraded is, in other words, it hasn't had rejuvenating serum pumped into it, is that it was operated by PDVSA, the Venezuelan conglomerate, which has various problems common to the Venezuelan economy in general. Now, there were also, the Chinese were also major players in Expo Cuba, which was held in the outskirts of Havana earlier this month. And something I caught earlier this week, the Bahamian government is in talks with China to divide fishing rights in the waters east of Florida that our Florida State Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is very concerned about. And according to the head of the commission, a gentleman named Nick Wiley,